Oh my god. Also, oh my god, hey, welcome back to my Stagey YouTube channel. If you have met me before, you will know that I am Mickey Joe Theatre and I am obsessed with all things theatre. And you may know that I have spent quite a lot of my time on my Stagey YouTube channel talking about Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella. For some reason, though I never intended to tether myself to this show, I have made just so many videos talking about this from its beginning, from my uncertainties about the show, to then reacting to what little news came out about it, going to see the show, making my sort of official review, talking about changes to the show, and then talking about the drama that plagued its West End run and eventual early closure. I'm pretty sure I had gone on record to say I did not anticipate a Broadway transfer happening quickly or smoothly, and that they definitely needed to do a lot of substantial work to the show's material prior to attempting to take it to Broadway. But lo and behold, it is arriving nonetheless. Proof, if ever I needed it, and I didn't, that Andrew Lloyd Webber is not watching these videos and does not care what I have to say. Which is fine, he has a lot of money and a lot of awards. Who am I? But it was announced yesterday in a press conference in front of the Imperial Theatre that Andrew Lloyd Webber's newly titled Bad Cinderella would open at that venue on February 17th of next year, 2023, one night before the closing performance of Phantom at the Majestic Theatre, interestingly enough. So obviously there is just so much that I want to say about this. I inadvertently ended up being kind of a scholar for the West End production, so I do have a little bit of insight into this show and into some of the bizarre choices that they are continuing to make. And we can see already from the limited understanding that we have of the situation that they are making changes for Broadway. There are changes to the show's marketing. There are changes to the show's title, to its casting approach. There are lyric changes. We're going to talk about all of those things today, as well as some other casting rumors that I've heard, some that already turned out not to be true, and some that I suspect still might be. Stay tuned for all of that. We are going to get to it. But before we do, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure you're subscribed to my Stagey YouTube channel. There is plenty more content just like this. You can rewatch all of my old Cinderella videos to understand how we got to this point. It has been a saga. And I've made similar content like this for some other Broadway shows. I'm talking a lot about Funny Girl at the moment, and I review a lot of shows that I see over here in the UK. If that sounds like the kind of video content you would be interested in on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed. And if you really enjoy it, you can use the super thanks button down below to give me a tip. That would be very helpful to me as a Stagey content creator. Now let's talk about Cinderella, shall we? So first of all, let's talk about this title change. This is all anyone on Twitter wants to talk about, and the reaction to it is mixed, but I'd say generally more negative. People are shocked and stunned and find it hilarious that Andrew Lloyd Webber would deliberately put bad in front of the title of the show. Off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly what I said, but I'm going to go through my old footage, and I am sure there is a clip of me in one of my first Cinderella videos suggesting that the title of the show ought to be Bad Cinderella, and I will tell you why. I actually think this is a great idea. A, because the show has an infamous reputation at this point prior to it even arriving in New York. You can't escape that, so from a PR perspective, you may as well roll with it and make that your story. B, there are so many Cinderella stories, and you need to wear the label of why yours is different. There's another musical by Stiles and Drew called Soho Cinders, which is an LGBTQ take on the Cinderella story, and that sort of wears on its marketing and on its name why it is a different version of that story. To have just another musical called Cinderella, to have it just be Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella, like, oh yes, you need to see this because this is my version, is A, egotistical, and B, not that interesting. But the reality of it is, it's reconceiving Cinderella as this punky, edgy goth girl who gets in trouble. Call it Bad Cinderella because that's what it is. She wears that on her sleeve, and that should be the title of the show. That is the angle for this show. It lets people know beforehand what the show is going to be about, because this show has always had an enormous marketing problem, and we will talk more about that in due course. Other reason why this is a good idea is because Broadway has a much closer relationship with Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella than we do here in the UK. Although, if you're in the UK, it's about to be revived at the Hope Theatre in Manchester with Grace Mowat and Jacob Fowler. I'm very excited to be checking that out next month, I believe. Make sure you've got your tickets. But generally here in the UK, we are not as close with that version of Cinderella. On Broadway, it was revived with Laura Osnes and then later with Keke Palmer and Carly Rae Jepsen not too long ago, and there's much more familiarity with the film adaptations, including obviously the Brandy and Whitney Houston one, Hello. So I think sensible of this show to distance itself from that, especially when Lloyd Webber has already plagiarized, or in his words, alluded to, the very popular melody of In My Own Little Corner for the song Bad Cinderella. If you're just now hearing Bad Cinderella for the first time, let me illustrate to you why that is. It's the comparison between in my own little corner, in my own little world, I can be whatever I want to be, with call me Bad Cinderella, I take pride when you sneer, and I do not like your something, whatever. Like, there's a definite similarity between those two. It is not a technical plagiarism as such, but I feel like you would get away with it if it weren't for the fact they were both Cinderella musicals and they were both the very popular I Want song sung by Cinderella at the beginning of the show. And they're both the chorus. They're both the first line of the chorus. Like, it's just, if you're going to pay homage to it, it's a very obvious way that feels a lot like plagiarism. So the title change, I'm actually on board with. You know, people are really shocked by it. People don't think it's a good idea. I think from a social media perspective, maybe they've thought about the fact that if you're Googling Bad Cinderella musical, it ought to distance it from some of the articles written about the West End production, about how the cast were treated backstage, about its premature closure. It puts some space between them and the narrative of that previous version because it has a different title, so people are going to be Googling a different thing. That could be yet another motivation for changing this name. Which brings us into the changing of the show's marketing. Now, the logo. We have to talk about this logo because when this was first unveiled, people very quickly here in the UK realised that it looked like testicles. It's this silhouette of Cinderella with a spray can, and she's like sprayed on a ball gown that looked like balls. And at the time, people thought this was an unfortunate accidental choice. The more I saw the show, I think it was meant to, with the colours they chose, with the fact it was a ball gown. I think it was meant to be a deliberate joke. It just didn't translate well because people aren't certain and weren't certain at that time what the show's sense of humour was meant to be. They were like, is this not a family show? Why would they do this with their marketing materials? But the first thing we see Cinderella do is to spray paint a giant male appendage onto a statue of Prince Charming, at least sometimes, because when I saw the show 3 times, everything she did to the statue changed every time I saw it. But on the cast recording, it's implied that that is what she did to the statue. So the idea of her spray painting a male appendage is canonical within the show. Now in the UK, they started with this neon blue and pink aesthetic that people didn't particularly warm to, and it didn't give audiences a sense of what the show was going to be. It felt quite dated, it felt quite 80s, it wasn't particularly modern, and they subsequently revamped the show's marketing materials with this floral, pastel-y aesthetic. They made it more about the love story, more character-focused, and they rolled out all of these lovely portrait pictures to train stations and underground stations. And you had pictures of Cinderella and Sebastian embracing and being in love, surrounded by flowers. And it was a very different approach. It was, oh no, this is a rom-com. You want to go and see this show for this reason. At the same time, they installed a bunch of very floral photo locations within the interior of the Gillian Lynne Theatre, which felt very much like catering to an obvious Instagram trend. Like, oh, people love like benches surrounded by flowers. It didn't necessarily say much about the show or help the show have its own specific identity. It was just like, look, Cinderella's aesthetic now. Now for Broadway, they seem to have changed this yet again. The testicle dress is no longer testicles. It is now an A. It represents an A, and B and D go either side of it to make the title Bad Cinderella. When they were unveiling the principal casting at the press conference, they had the new lead actress spray paint the B and the D to make the new title Bad Cinderella, which is a nice little PR stunt. And they have form for trying to get spray painted things to look like letters. They did this with some of the letters of Cinderella with trying to make it look like a spray painted shoe. They are just really trying to make that aesthetic work. And they have been for some time. The other change to the Broadway marketing materials is the color scheme. Now, when Andrew Lloyd Webber slid into a bunch of Broadway influencers' DMs the night before the press conference, he told them to come to the Imperial Theatre wearing black, red, and pink. To which I instantly went, huh? Because that is a horrible colour scheme. It's just an objectively horrible, clashing colour scheme. And that, as it turns out, is the new colour scheme for the marketing materials of Cinderella on Broadway. It's a little bit more Mean Girls in its aesthetic, and I think that's almost what they're trying to chase and trying to covet. The history of Cinderella's marketing has always been trying to look elsewhere to find out what they can emulate that's popular, rather than trying to look within and trying to articulate what it is about them that makes them marketable. But this is a show that I said has had a huge marketing problem because it doesn't know who it's trying to market itself to. The issue it's always had is that it's a traditionally family story told in a more adult perspective, and it absolutely doesn't know who it's for. It tries to put too much in for everyone. It has recently, when it revamped earlier this year, it foisted on a curtain call sequence that you could film. They really want to be on TikTok. This is the thing. Cinderella so badly want to become a big TikTok moment. They were pushing TikToks with the cast. This is why they set up photo locations around the Gillian Lynne Theatre. This is why they encouraged you to film the bows of the show, which is cute when it's 6 and you have an actual performance to film, but when it's just bows that you've choreographed, you're like, no, film it. It's just because they want you to put it on socials, and it's very obvious, and it comes across as a little bit needy, I'll be honest. And this, I assume, is why Andrew Lloyd Webber got in touch with a bunch of people who have a big TikTok and Instagram presence prior to the press conference. And it worked. Bad Cinderella is now being very talked about on TikTok, so, you know, kudos to him for that. So with the launch of the show, they have also released the single of Bad Cinderella, which is the same thing that they did over here in the UK. When the show was first announced, that was the first song that we heard, performed by Carrie Hope Fletcher. The new release of the track is performed by Broadway's Cinderella, a Dominican-American performer named Linedy Genao, whose name I am sure I am mispronouncing, very much apologise if so. And her casting is very interesting. We're going to talk more about why in the next segment, but for now I want to talk about this song. So the most conspicuous thing here is that they have made alterations to the lyrics. There are different lyrics throughout this song from the beginning, from the very second line. And I will say they fixed a little thing that used to bother me, because in the original version, Carrie Hope Fletcher would sing, Bad Cinderella, Cinderella is the catty name that they call me. And her name is Cinderella, so it's just a grammar issue when you say Bad Cinderella, comma, Cinderella is the catty name that they call me. Like, Cinderella is not the catty name they call you, that is your name. Or is it not your name? Because there's an implication in the classic fairy tale that she's only called Cinderella because she cleans the fireplace and she gets covered in cinders. So is that not actually her name? But then we never learn in this version that that's a nickname and not her actual name. The suggestion is that Bad Cinderella is the nickname. So now it's been changed to Bad Cinderella. Bad Cinderella is the catty name that they call me. It doesn't fit as well to the melody, but it makes more grammatical sense. This does highlight a very interesting thing, which is the title has changed, the marketing has changed, the lyrics have changed. The one thing that has not changed is Andrew Lloyd Webber's melody, his score. The song remains musically exactly as it was, with different lyrics. And so it feels as though he's changing everything else around him to try and make his show better, which you could say is a little bit arrogant and implies that he thinks that his own work is the best part of this show. But at the same time, the book and the lyrics and a lot of the development of the characters is what I had the biggest problem with when I went to see the show in London, so I'm glad they are being addressed. I didn't have too many problems with the lyrics of Bad Cinderella. I'm hoping that this implies they have fixed a lot of lyrics throughout the show. I mean, Man's Man is the biggest culprit for a song whose lyrics need rewriting. There are lots of songs like Far Too Late, I Know I Have a Heart, Only You, Lonely You. Those lyrics are fine. I don't think they need to be as heavily reworked. We have heard that there are going to be new songs for the Broadway production. I welcome this. Honestly, Man's Man could just get cut and I wouldn't be sad about it. Same for I Know You. There's potentially scope to have a song in each of those moments, but better songs could be written to serve those moments that don't make me want to blow my brains out. But it is interesting that there are lyric changes throughout Bad Cinderella. Again, it just seems like a way of distancing itself from the original production. And Lloyd Webber is known for this. He likes to make little changes throughout the runs of shows that are not working. Even as Love Never Dies was closing in London after more than a year of performances, I believe, he made a change within the last week. He added a reprise. They are generally small cosmetic changes that do not address the main criticisms of each show. I will say, this is kind of unrelated to this section, but the UK and Broadway have a bit of a different relationship to Andrew Lloyd Webber at this time. In the UK, he's kind of heralded as this great saviour of musical theatre. He is synonymous with what the general public know about musical theatre in the UK because he is the only composer who is a household name. He has achieved a much higher level. In the US, you have Lin-Manuel Miranda, and you have Sondheim, and you have Rodgers and Hammerstein, and you have Gershwin, and you have Jason Robert Brown. You have so many people who are all working. Stephen Schwartz, Alan Menken. And over here in the UK, there is Andrew Lloyd Webber, and then there is everyone else. And he is so big and takes up so much space that it leaves relatively little space for any other musical theatre composers in the UK. You have Stiles and Drew, but they are not as well known by the general public, unfortunately, because their work is fantastic. Hopefully we are seeing a change to this with the success of new writers like Marlowe and Moss, who wrote Six. Tony-winning Marlowe and Moss, I might add. And yet I feel like Broadway sees Lloyd Webber as more of a success, because some of his misfires, of which there have been just as many as his hits, are more distantly remembered there, where he has struggled to get productions to be long-lasting. Recently here in the UK, his shows like Stephen Ward, Love Never Dies, the sequel to Phantom of the Opera, they never made it to Broadway. So we've come to associate a lot of his more recent work with being flops, and Broadway hasn't seen those productions. They just know School of Rock being relatively successful and Phantom being the longest running musical on Broadway until very recently. So the question will be, is Cinderella going to affect Andrew Lloyd Webber's reputation on Broadway? What is beeping? Do you hear it beeping? But back to the new lyrics for the song Bad Cinderella. You know, there's a few that I miss from the original version. I liked the line about living in plexiglass houses, but she gets the same idea across. A lot of people are saying the new lyrics completely change the vibe of the song, and I don't think that they do. I think that they still articulate the same point and the same characterization. It's just a little fix that doesn't change too much. I appreciate some of them are shifted because they had a very British sort of a dialect. Lines like barking mad Cinderella, I don't think that would play as well to a US audience, because I'm not convinced that that's something that is said as often in the US. You can correct me in the comment section if I'm wrong about that, but that feels more English. Okay, so let's talk about the casting we already know on Broadway. I've just watched the press conference clip of Lloyd Webber announcing her, and he pronounces it Linedy Genao. I have no idea if he is correct because he's just as English as I am, but I'm hoping one of us got it right. So Linedy is a Dominican-American performer. She's an alumnus of the show On Your Feet, and she's definitely an interesting casting choice. Now, I was under no illusions that Carrie Hope Fletcher was going to go with this show to Broadway. I feel like if you read between the lines, or increasingly if you just read the lines, she's made it very clear how she feels about this show. She liked a couple of tweets made about it yesterday, and I think she's been very courteous towards it on social media. You know, she has not bashed it as such, but she has been clear and honest about her experience on the show, which, from what we already know, from what I've talked about in previous videos, from the way that the cast were treated, was not an overwhelmingly positive one. So I'm not expecting to see any of the West End cast members transferring to the Broadway production. There was a time when I wondered if Victoria Hamilton Barrett might go over as the stepmother. She was the only Olivier Award nominated performer in the original cast. In fact, the only Olivier Award nomination the show got entirely. She is going to be playing a similar role in a similar fairy tale musical, Hex, at the National Theatre over the Christmas period, but it does finish in time for her to feasibly open Cinderella on Broadway. However, probably it doesn't finish in time for her to go and be part of rehearsals. My expectation is that she won't. I think they're going to clean house completely and go for an American cast. I'm anticipating American accents. I'm anticipating different characterizations, because Victoria Hamilton Barrett's stepmother was heavily based on Joanna Lumley's Patsy from Ab Fab, and which, you know, Americans would also get that reference, because I believe Americans know and enjoy Ab Fab, I think. Again, Americans, correct me in the comments if I have that wrong, and I'll tell you about the casting I've heard rumored for that role in just a minute. But let's talk about Linedy first of all. Now, different stylistically to Carrie Hope Fletcher, we are once again going with a girl who is ostracized because of her looks, who is this gorgeous, thin, beautiful young woman. And I do think it would be much more powerful if you were to cast someone who didn't so readily conform to a Western beauty standard. Yes, she is a Latina performer, but the story has never been about Cinderella being racially ostracized. You know, over here in the UK, the principal actors playing Sebastian and Prince Charming were both black men. The godmother, who was the arbiter of the town's lofty beauty standards, was also a black woman. In fact, our alternate Cinderella over here was a black performer. The actress who was set to replace as the next Cinderella was a black performer. So the show has always been very racially diverse, but that has never been part of its story. It has never been about race in that sense. I would love to have seen a plus-size Cinderella. I would love to have seen a disabled Cinderella. I just think there's something very shallow in casting the type of performer who is always seen on Broadway and then saying, oh, this girl struggles so much because everyone tells her that she doesn't conform to a beauty standard. Let me know your thoughts on that one down in the comments. Listening to Linedy's voice, I also would have liked something a little bit more unique. She has a fantastic voice. She has a lovely, very pingy vocal placement, but I hear a lot of that on Broadway. It's very Mean Girls, very Heathers. It's very current, very contemporary, very the Broadway kind of style of singing. I would have loved to have heard something more original and more unique, kind of like Talia Suskawa, who is Broadway's current Elphaba, I believe, or when Philippa Sue emerged in Natasha Pierre and then Hamilton, where you're like, oh my gosh, this is such a different vocal type. I would have loved to have heard a more original tone that kind of musically conveyed the story of Cinderella being different to everyone else, but it sounds a little more generic. And the other thing I'm aware of here is that Linedy is not a name. Now, as much as they struggled ultimately to sell tickets in the UK, Carrie Hope Fletcher was a big box office draw. She has a very devoted fan base who will come and see whatever show she is in. And if she's in a musical, a big West End musical, they will definitely come and see it. This is not to say Linedy Genao does not have her fans. However, the rumour that had been spiralling around was that Miley Cyrus would be playing Cinderella on Broadway, which objectively sounded pretty insane, and I never really believed him, because I think if Miley Cyrus was to make a foray back into acting, back into that whole world that she had previously done as Hannah Montana, it wouldn't be with starring in a big Broadway musical that had been controversially received in the West End. I feel like her publicist and her manager would have put a stop to that before it could go ahead. Like, the roadmap for pop singers transitioning into acting has already been laid out by Lady Gaga. You do a couple of easier roles like an American Horror Story, you build up towards the kind of Oscar bait performances. This is before she's even done Broadway, because when you can do multiple takes in front of a camera, it's easier than trying to do 8 performances a week live to a Broadway audience. Like, that's a very big risk for a performer who has a reputation to maintain. So is Linedy going to prove a big enough box office draw to sell tickets, or are we going to see some big celeb casting in the other roles to try and boost the show's ticket sales? Here is some of the other casting rumours that I have heard, and these haven't been kept particularly secret. I think it was on Deux Moi that someone had posted that Colleen Ballinger was going to be playing one of the stepsisters. This tracks, this is her kind of casting. She's done Broadway before. Colleen is a YouTuber that you may best know as the woman behind Miranda Sings, who actually can sing very well when she wants to. But she's been in Waitress, she played Dawn, and the stepsisters in this would be another little kooky character part that would suit her very well. I think she's age appropriate for it. She has the right look for it. She has the right sound for it. This is casting that absolutely makes sense, and she has her own following who would then come and see her in the show. It's a smart move all around. The casting I've heard rumoured for the stepmother is Broadway's Jennifer Samard. I'm really hoping this is true, because Jennifer Samard has been a little fan favourite supporting role for ages and is just rising to prominence these last few years with her performance in Company that earned her a Tony Award nomination, as well as understudying Patti LuPone in Company, which is a big effing deal. I would love to see her getting to play the stepmother, and she does a character performance very, very well, and she does a voice very, very well. Jen Samard used to do the whole world of Forbidden Broadway and impersonating the Broadway divas. This is why she was able to understudy LuPone and emulate her performance as Joanne so well. So who knows what road she's going to go down with her stepmother if she is cast in that role, because there's a dozen different directions she could take that character in. She has a lot of options at her fingertips. Now, beyond that, I haven't heard too much casting. If anyone feels like speculating down in the comments section whether we're going to see like a Jordan Fisher type playing Sebastian, I really have no other ideas as to who else could be in this show, but I dare say that some of you might. So pop it down in the comments section. Who do you think should be cast in Bad Cinderella on Broadway? So with all of this in mind, with the new title, with changes to the show's material, do I think this is going to be successful? I mean, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned about the speed with which it's moved to Broadway. I think the level of change that it needed, yes, it needed changes to the lyric, yes, it needed some changes to the structure and to the book, but there are whole character arcs that I take such issue with. There are whole depictions of characters, the show's whole feminist message that somehow manages to become incredibly anti-feminist. I just think there are bigger problems within the entire concept and conceit of this show that physically cannot have been fixed in the short amount of time we've had between the West End closure and the planned Broadway opening. I might be wrong. They may have been working tirelessly to rewrite this show, but I am concerned. You can find out more specifically about some of the issues I had with the show. I did a whole video where I talked about the top 10 problems with Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella, if you want to know more about those. Just to briefly recap for you, there were some lyrics that I thought were ridiculous. There were some basic structural flaws within the show as far as I was concerned. The whole characterization of Cinderella and the lack of agency that she has throughout the show, because she shares so much of the plot with Prince Sebastian, and she doesn't affect anything within the plot. Nothing changes because of any action that she takes. Her own perspective on beauty is inconsistent. Every single woman within the plot hates every other single woman within the plot. There is not one positive or collaborative relationship between two women in this story. And there's just so many plot holes and inconsistencies and issues that prevented me from enjoying what ought to have been an entertaining production. And I'm not the only one who thought this. Even though it was well reviewed by a lot of the major UK critics, Johnny Oleksinski from the New York Post, who we've talked about a lot recently, this is the reporter who announced that Phantom would be closing on Broadway. He notably came over here, reviewed the production, and was so taken aback by the disparity between his reaction to it and the UK critics that he actually emailed me about it to ask what the hell was going on. This New York Post review was the one that made Lloyd Webber so furious, he rang up the cast backstage, allegedly from his holiday home in Mallorca, to lambast them because he had ambitions about taking the show to Broadway, and he thought that this American review would have hurt his chances of being able to do that. And yet, this is not the only New York-based review that it received. Matt Wolf reviewed the show pretty positively for the New York Times, so I'm not entirely sure how it's going to go with the rest of the New York critics when the show opens on Broadway. Ultimately, the critical reception is not what closed it over here, it was the lack of ticket sales. Now, obviously I have an opinion about the show, the way that it's been run, the way that it doesn't really seem to know who its target audience is, the way that it's tried to adapt and change itself in such minimal ways that don't address the real issues that I think that it has. I'm very receptive to finding out what changes are made for Broadway and how the show performs over there. I wish the best of luck to the cast and to the crew. You know, I want shows inherently to succeed. I want this to be good for Broadway and for all of the performers involved. At this stage, based on everything that's happened with the UK production, it would be impossible for me not to have doubts and misgivings about the trajectory of the Broadway production, but I remain cautiously optimistic for this cast. If changes have been made, we can hope that this show has been improved. But you know I will be watching very, very closely. So as and when we hear more news about Andrew Lloyd Webber's Bad Cinderella opening on Broadway, you will hear it here first. Make sure you are subscribed to my channel so you don't miss any more updates about this show. And thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed, make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you've gone and found me on other social media. I am Mickey Jo Theatre on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok. Go follow me there for lots more stagey content as well. I want to hear all of your thoughts about Bad Cinderella in the comment section down below. What do you think about the new lyrics? What do you think about the casting? What do you think about the red, black and pink aesthetic? I am so intrigued to hear people's thoughts about this. If you liked the original show, if you hated the original show, what do you think about this new version? And if you really enjoyed today's video, don't forget you can use the super thanks button down below to give me a tip. That would be really helpful to me as a stagey content creator. Or you can go to patreon.com/Mickey Jo Theatre, where you can gain access to some exclusive photo and video content, as well as getting the chance to support me as a content creator. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Jo Theatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!